is the Double G Show. Carlos Toro has joined me. We're going to recap the fight that just happened. Canelo Alvarez and Jermell Charlo. Carlos and I did a predictions piece that I believe it went up yesterday morning. We brought back Robert Silva as well, so we got the band back together at least on the preview piece. And Robert actually predicted the upset here. Now, I imagine this was not the Jermell Charlo that he was expecting to see, but you and I pretty much had it right. You had the decision. I thought that Canelo might be able to stop him late just from the body attack, which and there was a body attack tonight. But yeah, I mean, pretty like for a ho-hum decision. I didn't feel necessarily let down, and it was pretty clear early on that whatever the speed advantage that Charlo was going to have, he kind of just threw that strategy out the door and was just like, I just got to make sure I don't get hit with big shots here. What was your thought on his strategy based on what you thought he was going to try to do?
So the idea that Charlo was gonna go start the fight, bounce away, try to make this into a slugfest, I mean, that was probably never gonna happen. That's not really Charlo's forte. He comes out a little slow at fights and he ends them very, very strong. But ultimately, I think what just happened is Charlo was coming into this fight 16 months removed from his last fight at 154 pounds, and then suddenly you go up 14 pounds against a guy who's been establishing himself as the premier 168 pounder in the world for the last several years, and then just to have a slow start like that in Canelo, credit to him. I mean, round one was, I mean, both guys just landed just one punch, but round two, I don't think Charlo even expected Canelo to go firing off big shots. At the same time, Charlo was kind of shooting himself in the foot several times and throughout the fight, even in that second round when he just allowed Canelo to just move him around and just trap him up against the ropes. And Charlo's the taller guy. Had the longer reach. He should have been the one dictating the pace of the fight, and yet he didn't do that, not even once, throughout all the 12 rounds tonight.
Why do you think that was the case? Is it just one of those things where on paper you think you're going to be able to do something, and then when you actually get into the ring and you see Canelo kind of getting in that crouch, kind of going up and down, gliding, sliding, then you go, uh-oh, my strategy is not what I thought it was going to be, because now I have to really fight super defensively. Now, it's funny because they showed Sugar Ray Leonard at the fight before the main event started. And in my mind, I thought, I would love to hear how Sugar Ray would game plan fighting Canelo Alvarez. He historically made his money off of figuring out strategies, and Emmanuel Stewart as well. But figuring out, not Emmanuel Stewart. What was Leonard's trainer? I'm blanking on his trainer.
This would have been Roberts.
Yeah, this is Robert's stuff. You weren't even born yet. You were not even close to being born yet.
Oh no!
By the way,
my dad was barely born.
But I was just like wondering, like I wish someone would have asked him, because it obviously the strategy piece to this fight is really how it's funny. We'll use Oscar De La Hoya's terminology here when he said that Canelo had the blueprint to beat Mayweather. What is the blueprint to beat Canelo? I mean, we've seen him in close fights, several with Golovkin. Obviously, he lost the fight to Bivol, but you cannot game plan what Bivol did because he was just bigger and stronger and the better boxer. If you were that, then that's your strategy. But I just feel like, when you get in there and you feel that size and you feel that power, and maybe he's a little bit quicker and maybe his feints are a little bit different than you thought, it just becomes a different ball game.
Yeah, and just you mentioned, I mean, to beat Canelo, you obviously, well, you don't necessarily have to be bigger or longer. If Floyd Mayweather proved that, but this version of Canelo, I mean, Bivol kind of had the blueprint, but the problem is part of that blueprint is beat Dimitri Bivol, and there's no one on the planet that is that. I mean, physically, Charlo could have used his physical tools a little bit better, but he's not the kind of boxer that would be able to keep Canelo off rhythm for 12 rounds, and that's really what it boiled down to. Charlo is a great counterpuncher, but he's certainly not a better counterpuncher than Canelo, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Canelo is a better body puncher than Charlo. Canelo can start a fight much quicker than Jermell Charlo. And you combine all of that with, again, 14 pounds. I legitimately think, the jump in weight classes really affected him and how he was able to translate that power, because a lot of people don't realize in boxing, I mean, UFC and MMA in general, the weight classes, they're like very spread out. It's like a 10 15 pounds, but in boxing, you fine-tune your body for that specific number to the point where anything that deviates from that norm, it's just it wreaks havoc on your abilities. I remember talking to Mikey Garcia before he fought Errol Spence, and I remember him telling me that it took him like 2 months just to be able to get his body from 135 to 147. And the thing is, that power doesn't always translate. If you don't work specifically to get that power to translate from 154 to 168, as well as your speed, then a guy like Canelo, even though technically Canelo was shorter, he was a guy that was pretty well built already for that weight class, and he's fought Triple G 3 times already. He knows what to expect from a heavy hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to beat Canelo at this stage is to be just an otherworldly, exceptional boxer who can utilize his jab from the start of the fight to the end of the fight to keep Canelo out of rhythm, and Charlo just isn't that.
Yeah. Did you see Terrence Crawford's tweet about the fight?
Oh, I didn't, but I bet he had opinions.
His opinion was basically that that Charlo did not fight the fight. I'll read it. At Twin Charlo, you went out sad, didn't even try to win. All you did was try to survive. You should be ashamed of yourself. Now, maybe Crawford saw something in that fight and was like, huh, I think I can probably beat this guy. So let's create some interest here. But do you think, because you said the weight thing, now you would think that, because this is exactly what Charlo said, I don't have to cut that much weight to this fight. My body should feel pretty good. But if you ask me, he looked sluggish instead of sharp. Now, that could go back to what you said with the long layoff. But physically, I thought he was going to be moving around. I thought he was going to be playing a lot of cat and mouse. I thought he was going to make Canelo expend a lot of energy to run after him, because we know Canelo likes to load up on punches. And if you're running away or you're moving, Canelo's not going to have the time to really load up. And by being so stationary, after that first round especially, he just could not move enough. It just allowed Canelo to load up. That's what he was doing. He was actually, now Canelo did throw a good amount of jabs, but he was actually throwing a power shot to set up another power shot. Usually it was like a left hook to the body, and then over the, overhand right or a right hook. And I was just like, man, Charlo, you are a much better boxer to allow this guy to not even necessarily have to use his jab to throw his right hand. And so not that I necessarily agree with Crawford. I can't even make a statement like that, not having been in the ring, but it was surprising to me that he just did not utilize all of his skill sets. And some of the reasons why, we may have answered it already, but what did you think about that?
Ultimately, I think that what Charlo didn't count on was Canelo closing the distance so early, and to do it without really, using the jab. If you look at those first early rounds, Canelo wasn't throwing a whole lot. Those heavy shots were when the distance was already close, and he closed that distance just by his footwork.
Yeah.
He was Canelo was mainly in the center of the ring, and Charlo was still constantly moving, but Canelo's a smart enough fighter to not have to chase Charlo. He could just be able to cut the ring off with just his feet. And I don't think Charlo really had much of a game plan for that, because Canelo, with having the amazing skill set that he has, being able to attack the body with the frame that he carries, it's just something that it was almost like Charlo was hoping that he could kind of catch Canelo on an off night and maybe kind of goad him into doing some amateur mistakes, which at this stage of the game, that's not really a sound game plan to rely on, to hope that Canelo makes a mistake from the beginning, and to also just not do anything in the first few rounds. It was, you and I were chatting about it on the Fight Game Media Discord. It was baffling that Charlo, seeing as how I think Canelo threw one punch in that entire first half of the first round, and for Charlo to not take advantage of that, that's not really an issue of going up against Canelo. I mean, if you're not taking advantage of that against any fighter, you're bound to lose that round.
Yeah, the thing that I was just so gobsmacked, but at the same time, Charlo is also a slow starter, according to what people think about how his fights go. I mean, you said it. He's a strong closer, but knowing that Canelo says, I mean, he goes out and says, first 2 rounds, I'm measuring stuff. If I lose those rounds, so be it, because I'm just kind of downloading information. And Charlo, knowing that he's the faster man, I would have just gone out there and just won those 2 rounds and made sure of it, because, hey, those are 2 free rounds. Let's get those underneath my belt, and maybe I can get some sort of rhythm here. And he similarly seemed like he was just okay throwing those first 2 rounds out and not worrying too much about them. Let's talk about the knockdown. So it was in the 7th round. Canelo throws a overhand right. It connects, and Charlo doesn't go down. It hurts him. You could tell that it hurts him. Canelo follows up with an uppercut, which it lands, but it wasn't as big of a shot as the right hand. And Charlo, maybe seeing possibility of getting knocked out, takes a knee. Like, it was almost like a defensive thing to go, okay, he's going to kill me with this next shot, so I'm just going to go down so he can't. And that was the only knockdown of the fight. There were some other shots that I thought Charlo took very well. He got buckled a couple times, but stood up strong. There were other moments where I was like, man, this guy's taking some shots here, but he's not going down. He's taking these pretty well. What did you think of the knockdown, and then just the rest of the opportunities that Canelo had to try and finish him?
It reminded me a lot of some of the stuff he did against Sergey Kovalev, where Canelo was just slowly breaking down Kovalev, and then it just erupted into that decisive blow that just kind of ended things. And other instances like Callum Smith, where, I mean, it didn't end with a knockdown, but Canelo was systematically breaking down Callum Smith, targeting the arm so they couldn't throw a punch. And then with Charlo, it was kind of moving down all the way up, where you start trying to pressure him on the inside, and you work your way up into attacking the head and just sort of smothering him. And that's kind of what it felt like. Like, Charlo looked like he was being smothered when he got hurt. And you're right. I think it was a defensive call to try to take the knee, because, I mean, there was a legit chance that Charlo would have been stopped or knocked out if he hadn't taken the knee. But at that point, with what Charlo was doing, or rather was not doing, in those 6.5 rounds prior, it to me smelled like this is pretty much it. Unless Charlo could pull off a miracle, I thought this fight's over.
Yeah, I think he bounced back really well in the next round because I think what Canelo expected, and I wish you're not going to ask Canelo this question in a fight that he absolutely dominated, but it seemed like Canelo thought, okay, this guy is barbecue chicken. I am about to put this guy out. And so he kind of just comes in. He's not really caring too much about defense. And Charlo hit him with a couple shots, and then Canelo, I feel, backed off a little bit and was like, okay, I actually do have to box this round. I can't just come out for the kill. This guy's a little bit better suited than I thought he would be after that last round. So I commend Charlo for that. But really, again, it was survival, right? It was making sure that he just didn't go out. And maybe that's more what Crawford meant, was you just want to make sure you don't get knocked down. You weren't really trying to win the fight. And then in I think it was right before round 11, Derek James was basically saying the same thing, right? Like,
yeah,
what do you really want to win this fight? Because if so, you have to come out a lot harder than what you did. And the look never changed on Charlo's face. It was a look of concern and maybe a little bit of a mask of like, nothing's bothering me. But you never saw that like fieriness. You never saw that like, gosh, I'm close. Like I'm close to figuring this thing out. It was like a survival kind of face for the end of the fight, for the whole rest of the fight.
Yeah, and I hate to keep harking on this, but I think it really does bear repeating. Charlo just looked so out of rhythm, I think, because of the long layoff.
Yeah.
I mean, you go from fighting Brian Castaño and having, I think, in my opinion, the best performance of Charlo's career when he knocked out Brian Castaño last year, to then just not fight for the rest of the year. And not only that, having injuries during that layoff that it postponed the fight against Tim Tszyu, and then to go jump 2 weight classes against the top guy in that division, it was sort of I don't want to say like this was like a fight for him to get back into rhythm, but it felt like Charlo just wasn't his usual self in the ring, both physically and mentally. I'm not saying he was mentally weak or mentally compromised, but it didn't seem like he was honed in as he usually is for these fights. And, for a while, Charlo was a guy that kept himself regularly busy, and he doesn't usually take these long layoffs. So I think all this was foreign territory for him, and he just didn't quite know how to fully process it.
Yeah. This is the kind of fight where I forget, Daniel Cormier you mentioned UFC earlier, so it kind of reminded me. Daniel Cormier won a fight, and Brock Lesnar was ringside. And Brock Lesnar came in the ring, and I think he like double hand shoved Cormier. And they were clearly like trying to set something up, but nothing ever happened. Brock Lesnar was still in WWE at this point. But Daniel Cormier made a reference to like, yeah, when you fight Brock Lesnar, like it's like extra presents or something under the Christmas tree. It was something like that. I forget exactly what he said, but that's essentially what it is for guys going up to Canelo to face Canelo. Now, Jermell actually was substituting for his brother, who hasn't fought. He had some mental health stuff going on, and it looks like he's ready to come back. I saw that he had made a tweet about being ready to come back. But for Jermell, taking this fight is almost a no-brainer because of the amount of money that he could make taking the fight. And so when you get to this level of guys like a Mayweather, like a Canelo, before that a De La Hoya, sometimes now De La Hoya really didn't have a lot of these because there was so much competition for him at 147 back in the day. He didn't have, he didn't just beat everybody and then there's like nobody. And so it's like, oh yeah, why don't you come up, or why don't you come up, or why don't you come up? Pacquiao and Mayweather come up in weight a little bit at the end there. to face De La Hoya. But in this instance, it's kind of like Canelo's ran out of guys, and so you're trying to figure out who you can match make, in between certain weights, and maybe you can come up and now they're talking Bud Crawford, and that's quite a jump in weight, and Canelo would have to cut a lot of weight. So I just wonder, how much of this was you sort of have to take the fight if it's offered. If you're Jermell Charlo, if he had a year and a half, 2 years, 2.5 years to kind of gradually come up into the weight class like you would want someone to grow in the weight class, that fight might not be there anymore. So you can't really criticize him for taking it. But at the same time, you're sort of selling a fight that in the end is maybe not as competitive as you would think on paper.
Yeah. And the other aspect is, Charlo is still a world champion, 154 pounds. The only negative consequence for him taking this fight, aside from the loss, is that the WBO stripped him of the belt, because that was their ruling. And like, okay, you can fight Canelo, but if the moment you step into that ring, Jimmy Lennon Jr. called you up and introduced you as the undisputed champion, you're no longer WBO champion. Although it was really funny because just a bit of a sidebar, I made a tweet when the WBO made that ruling. And I read the specific wording of the ruling, and I said Jimmy Lennon Jr. and PBC had the chance to do the funniest thing ever, where Jimmy Lennon Jr. could just never introduce PBC, Showtime, Jimmy Lennon never acknowledged Charlo, not even once. And by the letter of the law of that ruling, Charlo would still technically keep his belt, because the ruling said he had to step into the ring and be introduced as the WBO champion.
Oh, wow.
So, but he's still a champion with the WBA, IBF, WBC, and there's still big fights for him, going back down to 154 pounds. But the thing that I worry about Charlo, it was never so much him going up in weight. But you and I have seen this song and dance before. It's the issue is when guys have to go back down.
Yes.
We have seen this time and time again. Hell, not even the first time a Canelo opponent jumped 2 weight classes for a fight and then go back down. We saw that with Amir Khan. Amir Khan,
oh yeah,
after he got knocked out by Canelo Alvarez, never looked the same. No, it was nowhere near the fighter that he once was, where he was a unified champion 140. One of the most famous examples, Roy Jones Jr. went up to heavyweight, won a belt there, and then was just a shell of a former self the moment he moved back down to 175. Now, granted, that was a significantly more drastic jump and probably the most extreme example in terms of like pure numbers as far as weight. But I think the comparison is still applicable to a certain extent, because Charlo is a big guy at 154 pounds. And now you're telling me you're just gonna easily drop those 14 pounds and be the exact same fighter that you were before you made the jump to fighting Canelo Alvarez? It's a little hard to say. It's a little hard to believe, because while Charlo may honestly believe he can do it, his body could tell him a completely different story and would have no control over that. The only 2 fighters I can think of in recent memory who've been able to pull that off are Nonito Donaire and Amanda Serrano. And those are the only 2 examples I can think of in the last couple of decades that can make the jump 2 weight classes, and then after they're done with their business there, they go back down 2 weight classes and they're just as elite as they were before.
My favorite version of somebody having to go up in weight and then coming back down and struggling to fight at the lower weight again. This wasn't even a real fight. Antonio Tarver asked to gain a ton of weight to portray a heavyweight boxer in Rocky Balboa. And then I think the next fight, so I think he beats Roy, and then he films the movie, and then he fights B-Hop and he loses to B-Hop. And then he would win a couple more times, and then he would lose twice to Chad Dawson.
I think a similar example, I think, was Jose Benavidez Jr., who was in Creed 3. And Benavidez was, for the longest time, 147 pounder, 154 pounder. I think he's now campaigning at 160. Nah, at least that's what we're hearing for the great brands. They may be in line for a potentially big fight coming up. But he was 147, 154, and then they portrayed him. I think it was either light heavyweight or cruiserweight. I'm like, okay, I know this guy is tall, but this guy's a string bean.
He was very small in that film too. He looked small.
Which is funny.
It's a great example.
Which is funny because like I'm also like thinking back as I actually watched Creed 3 again not too long ago. Like Creed did not look like any different at all, making the jump from light heavyweight to a full on heavyweight.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and you know the whole the timeline of that movie is really way off too. Like none of the timeline makes sense in Creed 3, though. None of the timeline in Rocky makes sense either. In Rocky 4, his kid is like 8 years old, and then the next day comes off the plane, and the kid's like 14. Like, what? How did this happen? All right, so a couple more things about this fight, and then I want to ask you questions about kind of about who's next. Did you see in both of in the piece? We all talked about Canelo's prime. He is now 33. He is, I don't know if you'd consider him a young or an old 33. He's fought a lot of fights in his career, very active, especially when he was a kid, essentially. And now at 33, he's carrying a lot of muscle. He's still throwing the hell out of all of his punches. Did you see any degradation in his skills or performance tonight?
No, skills, I would say no. I think maybe the power is starting to go out of the way just a tiny bit. But I think I really am starting to believe Canelo when he kept talking about how the left hand, like being now 100% healthy. You know, I'm not saying like, oh, that was the reason he lost to Bivol. No, Bivol was a better boxer, and that's why Canelo lost. But I think health-wise, Canelo looked good. I think he looked sharp. I don't think he looked at any point like he felt like he needed to rush to make anything happen. So I think that right now, I think Canelo, to answer your question, I think Canelo is an old 33, but one that can still go on for a few more years because he hasn't really taken much punishment. You know, guy's never been knocked down before. Bivol didn't really hurt him when they fought. Golovkin really got his shots, a lot of good shots in it throughout the course of their 3 fights, but Canelo was never like truly hurt to the point where you feared that Canelo was going to get stopped. And then you put all the different fights in between. You don't really have a lot of tough fights. So I say he's old in the sense of experience because he's been fighting close to 2 decades as a professional. I think his pro debut was when he was 15, so net like 18 years or something. But he's one of the age-weights, one of those fighters who can theoretically fight at an elite level for several more years. I think to me it's starting to become a question of how long does Canelo want to keep fighting, because there really isn't that many opponents out there for there to be a big event.
Right. As far as Charlo is concerned, obviously we just talked about the weight and him, going back to cutting that weight. Do you think a fight like this, where it is a step up in size and power and the way that he, defended emotionally, mentally, just the fact that he got waxed in this fight, do you think it affects him going back down and being the top guy, the at 154, or one of the top guys at 154? Like does it change anything for him, or can he just step right back in and be totally fine?
I think mentally, Charles going to be fine, because if you just look at how he was talking and his demeanor after the fight, I think to me it screamed to me that Charlo knew he was coming into this fight playing with house money,
Yes.
and overall in the back of the mind of his mind, he probably thought like, I'm getting a big payday. I mean, if I'm not getting hurt seriously, and I just lose because he was a better boxer that night, then whatever, because I still hold 3 world titles at 154.
Yes.
I was playing with house money. Not many people expected me to win with good reason. So I think mentally he'll be fine, especially when I think mentally he feels that he still has the edge over everyone else at 154 pounds. Physically, I mean, that could be a different story, seeing how his body will react. But the good news, right, technically for him is that he's going to have time. He's going to have time. He's not going to be in any rush to fight to defend his status of 154, because the one organization that put a hard deadline, they already stripped him of the title. So there's no need to worry about that. And you're dealing, and he's going to have to wait until the winner of Tim Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza. And I fully believe that's going to be an absolute war. And I think that's going to be an incredible fight, but one that will leave the winner who wants to fight Charlo next, probably needing a little bit of extra time to recover. And so Charlo, and again, Charlo was never hurt. I mean, sure, he got wobbled, he got knocked down, but it's not like he was bruised. He's not like he was dealing with a ton of cuts.
Yeah, well, we'll see how those body shots may have.
That's true. That's
him,
true.
Probably tonight and tomorrow and later this week, because he was getting hit to the body with some hard stuff, but he just took it well, which was part of, I'm sure, part of the thing with the way that he displayed his face was like, I can take this stuff. I would like to see more urgency in giving it back, but yeah, no, you're right though. Probably no worry about head injuries, no eye injuries, no cuts. I'm sure he'll be pretty sore. I mean, I didn't sense that he hurt his hands in the fight or anything. So yeah, I mean, he should get out of this fight pretty decently.
Yeah, and I think Charlo is going to come into the new year, I think, feeling fresh physically, because I think it's going to take, whenever the Tszyu Mendoza fight winner will feel ready. I mean, they're probably going to take their sweet time in getting themselves ready, both Charlo and the winner of that fight. And it's not even a complete guarantee that Charlo versus the winner of that fight is actually going to happen. I mean, technically speaking, there is actually less of an incentive for Charlo to fight whoever comes out on top immediately. So Charlo is going to be probably dealing with other mandatories. Erickson Lubin on the undercard won a title eliminator. No one wants to see a third fight between the two of them, because Charlo's already just decimated Lubin twice already. The IBF mandatory, I wouldn't say he's someone that Charlo is afraid of or really concerned about. So I think Charlo might take care of a mandatory or two before he jumps into fighting what I believe the number 2 fighter at 154, which is winner of Tim Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza.
As far as Canelo's next fight, there is talk of David Benavidez. There is talk of Jermall Charlo, though after this fight, I'm not sure the storyline is necessarily there.
It's going to end up, I think it's actually going to end up being more lopsided this time around. I mean, Jermall is dealing with his personal issues. Combine that with an even longer layoff, because he hasn't fought since June of 2021.
Right.
So I think it's going to be the exact same fight, if not easier for Canelo, in my opinion.
And then there's always talk about Terrence Crawford, especially after Terrence Crawford took care of business against Errol Spence. Who do you see as possibilities of fights for Canelo Alvarez in 2024?
To me, the fight to make is David Benavidez. I think this has been a fight that has been brewing for a while, and I think there is no better stage to hold that fight than Cinco de Mayo in 2024. I think it's going to be, and I think it'll be a massive, massive, like all Mexican war, or not war, but a humongous event akin to when Canelo fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Even though that ended up being the biggest of squash matches, it was a massive, massive fight.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I mean, David Benavidez, possibly. I know some people may throw dark horse Demetrius Andrade. I don't believe it because Canelo has absolutely no respect for Demetrius Andrade whatsoever. I think Canelo views Andrade as an absolute joke of a fighter who's not even worth his time. David Morrell's interesting. He's gaining so much steam right now. I don't think he's quite ready for Canelo Alvarez. But then the problem is now we're kind of entered this like, well, that's it. This is kind of the list. To me, I think you strike while the iron is hot and you fight David Benavidez. And if Canelo comes out on top, then there's still other options. David Morrell will have another year of seasoning under his belt, so you can fight him next September 2024. But the list keeps getting smaller and smaller, and Canelo, I mean, I think he's gonna I think its next fight is gonna be with a PBC fighter, so you can't even throw out the random matchroom fighter now, which even then, I mean, there's matchroom or / golden, but the fighters under the zone banner, the top two guys, quote unquote, it's Edgar Berlanga and Jaime Munguia. And that's not going to be attractive enough.
I mean, if you want to get a knockout, if you want Canelo to mop the floor with a young fighter who he probably could knock out, that Munguia would be one, but that would be great for his earnings and really bad for his career, I think, at this point.
Yeah. But it's funny because Jaime Munguia has been a guy that I thought could possibly be in line for a Canelo fight, and then his career the last few years has been completely stagnant.
Yeah,
like his move to 160 for a guy who had as much success, as much hype coming out of 154. I mean, I can't remember how the last time a young fighter's momentum was fumbled this badly. Like we're seeing with Jaime Munguia. But yeah, I mean, there were guys that maybe a couple of years ago you could have thought, yeah, maybe they could fight Canelo. And then for one reason or another, it's just now no longer something that makes a lot of sense to fight. And Benavidez is the one that makes the most sense. Morrell, you can talk yourself into saying it could make sense. But after seeing what he did to Jamal doesn't really make much sense. Terrence Crawford, I mean, makes even less sense. I mean, Canelo just trounced the guy who is the top dog at 154. What do you think is going to happen when it's the top guy at 147, who's already kind of undersized almost at 147 already?
Yeah. That is one that just on the scale, it doesn't make sense, but at the same time, I could sort of see why, obviously, why Crawford would want it, but it just sort of makes a joke out of weight classes, right? Like, just the difference and maybe you make Canelo come down, and he's and I don't know why Canelo would have interest in coming down unless he can't find another giant fight.
And I just don't think Canelo would feel comfortable body-wise to go down to even 160. I think his body is now, we are fully locked in at 168.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get away with 175, but going back down to 160 might be a little much.
He's just so short at 175.
He is. And I mean, the physical shortcomings, it was in full display against Dimitri Bivol. I mean, against Kovalev was old. He was coming on the equivalent of a pitcher's 3-day rest, where he almost got stunned by Anthony Yard in Russia.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and then you're expecting, oh, you almost lost to Anthony Yard on a freak miracle, and then you're expected to fight Canelo 2 months later. Like, that's really, I mean, Canelo just got him at the perfect time. But I mean, you talk about the guys at 175, Bivol's the top of the chain, and then Artur Beterbiev, he's just an absolute monster power wise, that it just that also doesn't really make sense for Canelo. Plus it would also involve Canelo doing something with Top Rank, and so I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
So let's say they do Benavidez and Canelo wants to fight twice in 2024. You mentioned the reason why Tim Tszyu might not get a fight with Charlo, but body wise, how would he be coming up?
Tim Tszyu against Canelo?
Yeah.
That's an interesting fight, but I think ultimately, to be honest, I think Canelo stops Tim Tszyu, because I think for as sharp of a offensive fighter and explosive Tim Tszyu still has a couple of defensive shortcomings where he has lapses in judgment every so often, where a guy like Canelo is not going to forgive. It's not going to forgive. And the thing with Tim Tszyu is a guy who starts off so explosively and can keep at it because he just overwhelms opponents with a barrage of shots, and it allows him to stay in rhythm. And the thing is, Canelo is a guy who can use his footwork to kind of make Tim Tszyu uncomfortable. And to be honest, I think Tim Tszyu will lose a little bit of the speed that makes him such a dangerous fighter at 154 pounds.
So let's talk about some of the bigger fights for the rest of the calendar year here. A fight that is big just because it's MMA versus boxing. Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou fight in less than a month in Saudi Arabia. Now, the reason why that fight is kind of not that people are taking it more seriously than they were, but we have the news that Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk are possibly going to fight. Now, I know that you have your own questions about whether or not that is a done deal, but the idea that you would set up a fight for late December, early January, and he's supposed to fight Ngannou in late October kind of tells you how seriously Fury thinks that this fight with Ngannou should be taken. But what are your thoughts about the Usyk fight? Can they get it done? What stops it from getting done? And why would they make this announcement, or at least try and get people to think that this thing is coming if there's still some doubt?
Yeah, and honestly, if any doubts that I personally have, that's really more the
cynic,
the cynic in me, because we've seen big fights be quote unquote a done deal, and then later on it falls apart because, oh wait, well, there was this one thing, and that snowball into a even bigger thing. And at this point, I mean, it's the date. The date is literally the only thing that's left. Now, well, and the broadcasting details of that fight, I would imagine ESPN would probably be the U.S. broadcaster for that fight. And as far as the date, honestly, at this point, I think it's really up to how does Fury feel after the Ngannou fight. I mean, if Ngannou, let me put it to you this way: if this ends up being like the safest worked shoot boxing fight ever, then I think it's closer to January. But if it ends up being potentially chaotic, if this ends up being Rocky versus Thunderlips in Rocky 3, then I think Tyson will probably want maybe a week or two off just to kind of calm down a little bit and wait maybe till early January. But overall, I mean, if this fight was happening, it was all because it was going to be the Saudis, because Saudi Arabia signed Usyk to a co-promotional deal. Like the Saudi Arabia kind of basically, the prince made its own promotional boxing company. Don't ask me how many Ali Act rules violations were there, but yeah, I mean, look, the money that is rolling in from the Saudis, I mean, it was too big to pass up, and you know, I think it's an incredible fight, and I do think that you can honestly make an argument for both of these guys. I think right now, I think maybe I would say Fury would probably win if you ask me right this second. I mean, you do kind of have to throw a little bit of doubt Usyk's way, especially with the Daniel Dubois fight that happened not too long ago. So, I mean, look, it's a massive fight. We've been clamoring for an undisputed heavyweight champion for how many years at this point? I wish it was Wilder versus Joshua when that iron was hot, but
that was culturally so much bigger than this is going to be.
Oh yeah. I mean, and listen, and you and I have seen major events in Saudi Arabia. It just doesn't translate super well to it being a major mainstream event at like 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on a Saturday.
Yeah, not in Vegas. You don't have the craziness of Vegas and just the big crowds and such as well.
By the way, and if you do this like first or second week of January, you might be potentially going up against major college football bowls. So
and NFL playoffs if depending on when you do it too.
Yeah, so I mean, there's going to be some major competition rolling your way, and also it's most of America's not really going to care as much as Wilder versus Joshua, because I mean, Usyk's hardly fought in the U.S. and Fury, while there were a ton of pay-per-view buys for the trilogy against Wilder, he hasn't really done anything of note since then. I mean, what do you really have to show for since that Wilder trilogy? Beating up old man Derek Chisora, knocking out the corpse of Dillian White.
Yeah,
that's not really setting the world on fire.
No, not at all. A couple of the other fights that are on the radar. It looks like I don't know what are the broadcasting rights for Fury and Ngannou. Like I don't, is it a pay-per-view? Like what is the deal with that fight?
So it's a ESPN plus pay-per-view.
Okay, got it.
If what I'm remembering is correct.
So November 16th, we have Shakur Stevenson against Edwin De Los Santos. We have Regis Prograis against Devin Haney on December 9th in San Francisco. I am going to try to be there. I want to see if I can get a credential for that fight. San Francisco is going to be a hard building to draw, I think, the Chase Center. I went to an AEW show earlier this year, and, you know, they maybe had it about, I would say, 70% full. I know when WWE runs out here, they have a house show there tonight. They're like half or less. San Francisco is just an interesting place for a show like this. And I know, you know, Devin's Bay Area guy. San Francisco's building is the newest building. I think they're going to have a hard time filling that place up, especially with boxing ticket prices, you know, being fairly high. So, but I'm still excited. I rarely ever get to see big time boxing in the Bay Area. I'm trying to remember. Andre Ward fought in Oakland during the tournament, the Showtime tournament years and years ago.
I think his last fight in the Bay Area, I think it was in Oakland. I think it was Sullivan Barrera a few years ago. I think that was his first or second fight after making the jump to 175, if I remember correctly.
I was also in San Jose, and this is when Golden Boy was doing stuff with our boy Victor Ortiz. And who else was that? Who else was on that show? I can't even remember the guys, but there were three kind of like, semi-main eventers on pay-per-view fights, but they were all Golden Boy guys, and that was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun there watching that show, but we don't get to see it, so I'm excited. Even though I think it's going to be a hard draw, I'm still going to try and be there and cover it for Fight Game Media. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a really, really good fight. Bit of a shame that it's going to be on the Zone pay-per-view because, dude, that is asking for a death wish as for financial. Yeah. I mean, I get that both guys are commanding a really high payday, and I think theoretically pay-per-view is the only way to go. But I mean, you're really not setting yourself up for a lot of success, as far as the pay-per-view business is concerned. But it's still going to be a really good fight. I am looking forward to that.
Anything else you're looking forward to the end of this year?
I'm trying to look. I mean, I spoke about Tinsu Brian Mendoza so many times. It's October 14 on Showtime TV if I did not mention it soon.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna try. It's, the problem with this stuff is there's so much wrestling on TV that I have to pay attention to. That it's so hopefully I'll be able to check. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to at least watch it, at some point. But it's just, this wrestling killing me.
I mean, Wrestle Dream it was what 16 hours from the time that we are recording this live, and I mean, I just saw the updated card. Oh my God, Wrestle Dream's going to be a 7-hour show.
The 0 hour is not an hour. It's like a 0 hour and a half.
I'm like, that's like the match that they have announced. That's almost a full Dynamite full of matches there. You mentioned Shakur Stevenson and Wendell Santos. Co-main event, Emmanuel Navarrete versus Robson Conceição. I mean, I think that'll be a good fight. One fight at the start of the year. In January 2024, Archer better be efforts to Callum Smith. I think that's actually going to be a really, really good fight. Better BF is still a very dangerous fighter who you can sort of start to see a little bit of cracks in in that armor a little bit. Callum Smith is on a tear. I think momentum wise, the way he looked since the Canelo loss. I thought Callum Smith was just done after getting trounced by Canelo Alvarez. He has recovered about as well as any fighter I've ever seen in recent memory, coming off a Canelo loss. And I think that's going to be a potentially really, really good fight. And after that, there's not a major fight. There's a lot of fights where like I guess the degenerate boxing fan like myself is going to be excited about. I mean, there's a lot of fights that I'm really excited about, but not so much that the casual audience. I mean, I don't think anyone wants to hear me gush about a Jinjiro Shigeoka fight in Osaka in about a week, which I'm excited about because I've been a huge fan of this 105-foot guy. But yeah, no, this is you're kind of winding down a little bit. I mean, this is the last major boxer versus boxer pay-per-view of the year, assuming Usyk versus Fury takes place in 2024. But overall, I mean, we're getting some good fights, but nothing near the level of what we just witnessed tonight.
Yes, agreed. Okay, I just want to make a couple mentions here. Sunday morning, the Power Bombshells are streaming live here, 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. They are doing the pre-show to Wrestle Dream. Actually, they're so early, they call it the pre-show. And then after the Wrestle Dream pay-per-view is done, the Boom, Kevin Ely and James B. McDaniel will go live. I believe Paul Fontaine from the Dynamite Show will be with them. So we still have a couple of more live streams this weekend. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. I promised that I was going to talk more boxing, and we still have our MMA show, but we no longer have a boxing show in our weekly pay-per-views. So it's kind of up to me to find opportunities to talk. So Carlos is always Carlos and Robert are my two favorite guys to talk boxing with, like point blank. So they're my guys. And whenever Carlos is available and wants to do this, I'm always open. But Carlos, plug your Twitch stuff. I don't know how much you were able to do while you were sick, but I know you were trying to grow that channel the last time that we chatted.
Yeah, I'm still kind of recovering a little bit. So for those who don't know, I had COVID last month, and I'm still dealing with a post-COVID cough that I will admit, doing the show, I was worried that I was going to be coughing about 20 times more than I did. I think I only coughed twice tonight. So that is a massive win for me already. But yeah, so I've been doing a lot more stuff on Twitch, doing more video game stuff. You can follow me at Toro Night. That's TORONITE. Right now, I'm doing stuff like speed runs of old Pokemon games. I wanted to sort of celebrate tonight and do like a full-on playthrough of the original Punch-Out.
Oh wow.
I just couldn't find I just wasn't able to get it going, but I do hope to do that, because that was a promise I made to myself, that I was going to stream myself playing the entirety of Punch-Out in one go. And I will do that.
Are we talking Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, or are we talking the version when they took Mike Tyson out of the game?
The version that they took him out of the game, because I actually don't know if the Nintendo Switch Online has Punch-Out.
It probably doesn't, because
no. Well, I don't know I don't remember if it had any version of Punch-Out, but I do have the NES Classic, which is like this little portable Nintendo Entertainment System that comes preloaded with like 20 games, and one of them was Punch-Out, and that was the version with no Mike Tyson's. It was Mr. Dream.
Yeah.
And so I need to sort of get back on that train, if you could, that was unabundantly close. That's my cat scolding me to go to take over. But the farthest I went to the last time I tried doing that was Don Flamingo.
Oh, really?
He was. I just couldn't beat it. I just couldn't solve him.
It's because he doesn't throw his punch. He winds up and stops, and then he throws his punch, and so you have to time it correctly from what I remember. So Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. This kind of will show my age a little bit, unfortunately. If I had a controller in my hand and I could listen for the beeps, I think I could still put in the code to skip all of the fighters to get to Mike Tyson, just because it's just kind of one of those. It's like the Contra code that's just in your in your memory. I could beat Mike Tyson before I could beat Super Macho Man. So I actually beat Tyson before I could go through the game all in one swoop, like you're trying to do. Eventually I did. I was able to do that like a couple of times, but it is not easy, because if it's not you get hit with an uppercut by a bald bull, you could take that wind up or that punch that Super Macho Man throws that's hard to time, and then Tyson's got those crazy fast uppercuts. So there's a good challenge factor. I mean, in a sense, Punch-Out is just a puzzle game. It's just a memorizing moves and buttons and timing it. But still, man, that there was very little there was very little more exciting in my video game career as a young 11 or 12-year-old, to where I was just like, wait, I can beat Mike Tyson. I can actually just beat the end game. Like, this is really cool. So yeah, I played so much Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there are people who speed run the game and they beat the game in one go blindfolded.
Yeah, I mean, it's all patterns, and if you can hear the sounds, I totally get it.
Yeah, no, it's unreal just how good some of these people can get just playing Punch-Out.
All right, thank you to Carlos for hanging out with us after the last giant fight of the year here, and we'll check back in with Carlos if there's another big fight coming up. Hell, if
hopefully one that's competitive.
if Fury and Usyk happens, I think that will be a perfect opportunity to get back here.
Yeah.
So thank you, Carlos, for jumping on. For Carlos, I am Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.